Hi, I'm Robbie Bobby. The topic of this video is the ego. I chose this topic because it is a program topic. People often refer to someone's inflated ego or the need to reduce or puncture their own. I've even heard people say their goal was to eliminate it. At one point in my recovery, I decided it would be good to kill my ego if it were possible. However, if you want to get rid of something or simply dial it down, you should have a good understanding of what that thing is. For example, if I wanted to eliminate or dial down fear, it would be most helpful to look at it from different angles, see how it shows up in my life, see how it helps me, and how it harms me. While fear is considered one of the top 3 character defects in AA, not all fear is bad. It depends on the exact nature of it. This gets us into the nuances of fear. And while we trust our higher power to separate the two and only remove the bad, it's helpful if we can understand why he hasn't taken it all. The same is true for anger and resentment, as well as the poor, misunderstood ego. So, what exactly is the ego? Well, I think the first place to look for an answer is in the teachings of Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, who developed a model or psychic structure explaining the mind, which comprised 3 parts: the id, ego, and superego. To understand the role of the ego, you must first understand the other parts. We'll start with the id, which Freud considered primitive, instinctual, and fully unconscious. It's associated with basic needs, wants, emotional impulses, sex drive, aggression, passion. It acts on the pleasure principle, which means it's oriented towards immediate gratification, seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. It knows no judgments, values, or concept of morality. And within the id, contrary impulses could exist side by side, not canceling each other out, which leads to inner conflicts. Now let's look at the superego. The superego reflects internalized cultural rules, mainly absorbed from parents, but also other authority figures, such as teachers and religious figures. Generally speaking, the child's superego is that of the parent's superego. One's inner sense of right and wrong that criticizes and prohibits the expression of drives, impulses, and passions of the id. It works in contradiction to the id, aims for perfection, an idealized sense of self, is both conscious and unconscious, but mostly unconscious. And it punishes the ego with feelings of guilt, shame, inferiority, and anxiety. Now let's look at the star of this video, the ego. It's a sense of self, that which feels, acts, or thinks. Mediator seeks balance between primitive drives of the id, limitations imposed by reality, and the restrictions of the superego. Acts according to the reality principle, which is to assess the reality of the external world and act upon it accordingly, as opposed to the pleasure principle of the id. It's associated with reason and common sense, also judgment, reality testing, control, planning, defense, synthesis of information, intellectual functioning, and memory. Subject to realistic anxiety regarding the external world, moral anxiety regarding the superego, and neurotic anxiety regarding the strength of the passions of the id. Employs defense mechanisms to reduce tension and anxiety. These include denial, intellectualism, fantasy, compensation, projection, rationalization, regression, repression, and sublimation. It determines the split between conscious and unconscious. Okay, think of that the next time you want to get rid of your ego. Imagine your id and superego without a mediator. To put that into ACA terms, imagine being completely controlled by your critical inner parent and inner child and inner teen all the time. Well, this is similar to what happens when there is a takeover and one of these inner family members pushes our adult self out of the driver's seat and takes control of the bus. Yes, we need to thank God for our ego. I think what recovery does is not get rid of or dial down the ego, but rather allow it to function properly. I tell you this so that you don't waste time trying to fix the thing. It's way too complicated. Just work on your recovery and let the ego take care of itself. Okay, let's look at it from a simple and more basic perspective, yet still within the teachings of Freud. You see, Freud published all of his work in German. He never used the words id, ego, and superego. Those are Latin words which were chosen by the translator. Let me break it down. Freud wrote in German, das Es. That's D-A-S-E-S. This translates into English as the it, as in I-T. That's it. That doesn't sound very compelling or interesting, does it? But the Latin word for it does. And so the it became the id. Very mysterious. Freud wrote in German, das Ich. That's D-A-S-I-C-H. This translates into English as the I as in self. The Latin word for I is ego. And finally, Freud wrote in German, das Über-Ich. This translates into English as the above or over I. In other words, what is above the I or self. The translator used a rough synonym, super, in place of above, which gives us the superego. Therefore, the simplest translation of ego is I, or self. It can also be thought of as a sense of self. But the sense of self does not exist on its own. It exists along with a sense of others, as well as a sense of God or higher power. And it's the relationship between these that's important. If your sense of self is greater than God, you'll have a problem, at least in working the 12 steps. If your sense of self is much larger than your sense of others, you're likely to run roughshod over them, to cause them harm and not notice or care. However, if your sense of self is much lower than others, then you will likely resemble an approval-seeking codependent. That's not good either. The sense of self must be on par with others and in proper relationship to God or higher power. The steps are designed to restore this order. So again, just work the program and let the program work you. If you got something from this video, please click like and subscribe. If you know someone who might benefit from it, then please forward it. I'm Robbie Bobby. Thank you for listening, and as always, keep coming back.